So hi everyone, and a good afternoon, and welcome to Different Women, Different Places 2, The Power of Tribe, Same Gender, Different Race. My name's Campayne, and I am the Director of the Diversity Practice and founder of Different Women, Different Places. And this begins Black History Month. So today is the 1st of October. It's also Nigeria's Independence Day. And so again, I'm wearing my green and white in celebration of Nigeria's 60th year. So today, what we're going to do, today we are going to have a very fearless conversation. We're going to begin to redefine and reclaim what Black History Month actually means. And we're going to do that by having, as I said previously, a real courageous conversations about the relationships between different women and white women. We asked in our research, is gender a unifying factor? 92% of the 600 women that participated in the research said absolutely no. So I know we're in a new space, still in the middle of the pandemic, still in the trauma of Black Lives Matter. And it's one thing to have conversations about race, but it's another thing to have conversations that really matter and that will really make a difference. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to dig deep. So make sure that you have everything that you need. As you know, this is 90 minutes, and so we're not going to have any breaks. So grab some water or anything else and strap in. But to get things going and to get us off to a good start, we first have a scene, a conversation between two women that's based on real life events. So over to you, Tina and Lorraine.
Hey Lorraine, how are you doing?
Oh, hi Tina, I'm fine. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Nice to see you. Nice to see you.
Yeah, great to see you. How are things going?
Yeah, not too bad. I mean, we've got so much to crack on with, haven't we?
Oh God, tell me about it. I know.
But I just thought, we don't know each other. So I mean, what are your plans for the weekend now that the sun's decided to shine again?
Yeah. I'm going to be hanging out with my sisters. I've got 3 sisters, a niece, and I've got a little nephew on the way. So we're having a bonding sister moment.
Oh, that's lovely. God, how nice.
Thanks.
So,
How about you?
Yeah, no, we've got no plans, to be honest. It's been so busy, so full on at work that I just thought I need a quiet time just to kind of regroup. Yeah. So how are you getting on being part of the organisation? Because you've not been here that long. So tell me a little bit about how you came to be here and what your background is.
Yeah, basically before I came here, I was working for a CCG in Redbridge. It was fantastic organisation to work for, and I literally got that placement straight out of uni. I just finished my degree and diploma and went straight into that, so it's a nice transition because that's the kind of work I was interested in. And then obviously this opportunity came up and now I'm here, and it's fantastic. Another great organisation.
Yeah, wow, so you've got a degree. Wow, I mean, I would never have imagined somebody like you would I mean, God, you must be really clever. I mean, that's really impressive. Yeah, I mean, I haven't got a degree. Mind you, you are really articulate, aren't you? I mean, you carry yourself really well. You're obviously really super brainy. Yeah, good for you. Yeah, wow.
Okay, that's really nice, Tina, but sorry. Did you say someone like me? I'm not quite understand what you meant by that statement. What do you mean, someone like me?
No, you know what? I mean, I didn't, and I didn't actually mean anything by it anyway, because you're obviously really clever. I mean, I haven't got.
Yeah, I am. Thank you. Sorry, someone like me, articulate. I am educated. I'm not quite understanding your statement, Tina.
Lorraine, I'm not racist, if that's what you think. Really, I'm absolutely not that person. I have got Black friends, and actually, I don't see colour. I mean, when I look at you, I don't see colour. So, I am not that person. I'm not racist. So, don't be thinking that, okay? I mean, to be honest, we have got a lot of work to be cracking on with. So,
I do understand that, Tina. But can I just say that you obviously don't understand why I'm upset by the statements that you just made, and you don't see colour. So that just says to me, Tina, that you really need to check your bias and privilege at the door.
So a real conversation based on a real story between two women. Really want to encourage you also to use the chat function to get your reactions to that. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce you to the amazing panel of speakers that are going to build on, really build on this in much, much more detail. But by way again of context, when we think about the gender agenda, 202 years, it said, it will take to achieve gender economic parity. What does that actually mean for different women, Black, Asian, and ethnically diverse women? The 30% Club have more recently announced that they've achieved their goal of having 30% of women on FTSE 100 250 boards. But which women? Who are they really talking about? We know that the NHS is a great example. Our beloved NHS, 77% of employees in the NHS are women, and also as a sector, has very high levels of bullying. So the question is, who is bullying who? We also know that the gender pay gap for ethnic minority women is kind of currently unknown in the UK. In the US, white women earn 82 cents to the dollar of white men. For Black women, that's 62 cents. For Latina women, that's 54 cents. So there is a significant pay gap between women. We're also familiar with Amy Cooper and what happened in Central Park. Very, very familiar with the Karen term. And if for this conversation, happy to use my name. So use my name as Carol. So there's a lot that's going on in the gender space currently and right now. So to take us and do an even deeper dive, I'd like to introduce you firstly to Sabina Khanom. And Sabina is head of inclusion for Aviva. And Aviva is our key sponsor this evening. Sabina is head of inclusion, as said. She's worked in diversity and inclusion for over 10 years, both in the private and the public sector. She holds an MSc in organizational behavior and uses this background in psychology to take an evidence-based approach to diversity and inclusion. She was previously head of inclusion for King's College London too. I've had the great pleasure of working with Sabina, who brings courage, fierce tenacity, and a real commitment to race, ethnicity, gender, and all the other dimensions of diversity. It's a great pleasure to have you here, Sabina, and thank you for joining us. If you could just turn on your mic, great to have you. Lovely. And next to bring is Yvonne Coghill. Now, I describe Yvonne as one of the, if not the most powerful force for change in the NHS when it comes to race equality. Recently retired, Yvonne, with fierce courage, has led the NHS on a very different path when it comes to race. Yvonne started her nurse training at Central Middlesex Hospital in 1977 and has since held a number of really important operational and strategic leadership positions. In 2004, she was appointed at the Department of Health as the private secretary to the chief executive of the NHS, Sir Nigel Christ. Yvonne was also the director for RES, the Workforce Race Equality Scheme implementation in the NHS, in NHS England, and also deputy president of the Royal College of Nursing. It's again great to have you here, Yvonne.
Thank you, Carol. Great to be here.
Great. So the next person I'd like to bring to our esteemed panel is Anne-Marie Archard. Anne-Marie has been working in the UK public sector for over 25 years, and in the last 15 years has focused on leadership development, workforce development, and organizational development. She's currently the interim director of leadership for the NHS London region, having spent 8 years as the director of the NHS Leadership Academy in London. Anne-Marie is also a different woman, different places ambassador, and is really, in working with her, stepped up to the plate in shaping a more inclusive agenda for women. Thanks, Anne-Marie, and great having you too.
Thanks for inviting me, Carol.
Awesome. So next we have Suzy Levy, rather. Suzy, I describe as authentic, one of the most determined and dedicated women in the diversity and inclusion field, who is really committed to eradicating racism, and one of the very few white women who genuinely want to see an end to racism in the workplace. She's both spirited, committed, unwavering in holding systems to account. Perhaps what she's best known for is her leadership of the People Agenda. She's the managing director of Red Plate, and uses her business transformation background and her understanding of workplace behavior to work with leadership teams to create hard-hitting cultural change programs and to drive measurable inclusion and diversity results. She's also a non-exec director at the Home Office and a member of the Civil Service Leadership and Learning Board, as well as a third sector coach at Impetus and a trustee at the Women's Sport Trust. So wow, what a powerful panel we have. I wanted to, really welcome you and share a quote from T'Challa. We recently lost Chadwick Boseman, as you know. And one of the things that he said in Black Panther is this: more connects us than separates us. But in times of crisis, the wise build bridges whilst the foolish build barriers. We must find a way to look after one another as if we were one tribe. So reflecting on that scene that you just saw, did you get a sense of one tribe? And just very quickly, what was your response or reaction to what you saw? The conversation between Tina and Lorraine. Do you recognize it? Who'd like to start? Yvonne.
Yeah, it's sadly not unusual. You know, the issues between Black women and white women are well documented, and not only are they well documented, well known and well experienced by people of color. And it's not just, I think, about white women, it's about other women of color as well. I don't know if we're going to be going into that, but there is there's definitely an issue. And you know, the white lady in the clip was you know, she was just stating what she felt, because actually I don't see color is supposed to be a compliment to you. It means basically I see you as being white like myself, so I don't actually look at your color, when really and truly what we want as Black women is to be seen for who we are. And if you're saying to me, I don't see your color, you're basically saying, I don't see you. And I guess that's because they, the people that say that or use that terminology, and they still do that quite a lot, I think, these days, it's because they feel uncomfortable with my Blackness, with the lady's Blackness, and struggle very hard to use the term Black. You know, I see you as a Black woman and I appreciate and value you for who you are. Nice and easy, it trips off my tongue, but actually it doesn't trip off the tongue of white people. And in that, there's something about the fact that white women believe in their own superiority, because if they're not seeing you as being anything other than the same as they are, they want you to be the same as they are, because it makes it easier for them in terms of building relationships. So I'm not seeing your color, and I have Black friends, you know.
We also hear that as well. Sabina, agree, disagree, in terms of what Yvonne has said? You want to build on that?
Yeah, so I completely agree that it happens every day, or you know, all the time, in different, you know, at school, at work, wherever you are, you know, traveling, and it happens a lot. But there, as Yvonne touched on earlier, there is a difference between some of the stereotypes that Asian women have compared to Black women, and sometimes, you know, ours are more positive. And I don't think I've ever had somebody question kind of my educational background, and that is because my stereotype says that I will be educated. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about, you know, what that means for different women and how we support each other later.
Right, so some consistency there. Anne-Marie, hearing, kind of reflecting on the scene between Tina and Lorraine, and also reflecting on what you've heard from both Yvonne and Sabina. This is a kind of everyday, not surprised. Were you surprised by it? Is that part of your lived experience?
No, unfortunately, I'm not surprised about it. And, you know, it could be something that I could quite easily have said at some point in my life, you know, before I became more aware of how endemic racism actually is. And I think that, you know, rushing to that defense that white women use, white people use of, I'm not racist, because nobody wants to admit that they are racist, because it's such a big issue, but it's the one that we start addressing if we're going to make a difference. So I think for me, it sort of encapsulated one of the biggest issues that we're facing as white women and women of colour coming together to actually try and work differently.
So thanks for that, Anne-Marie. One of the biggest issues, and I think, Suzy, you know, we're using the term white woman, and so again, referring to that. See, how comfortable are you in terms of using that particular term, and also what are your reactions to the scene?
You know, I'm very comfortable with the term white women. I think we need to own all sorts that goes with it. In terms of Yvonne's comments around uncomfortableness with language, one of the things that I find makes everyone so uncomfortable, they don't know whether or not to use the term Black or African Caribbean or women of color, but they're also uncomfortable because they don't want to talk about privilege, they don't want to talk about racism, they don't want to talk about merit. So it's not just the terms of how do I acknowledge your quote color. That is the first step. But if you don't see color, you can't see racism.
Right.
You don't see the beautiful, the diverse, the wonderful. You can't see the good, the bad, and those types of things. So I think we get tripped up not just on our first language in terms of what should I say, but we get tripped on the emotional baggage behind it. And that conversation is stilted from then on out. So I recognize the scene over and over, especially the I have Black friends part, because as an inclusion and diversity consultant, everybody tells me they have Black friends.
So what again, kind of in terms of the purpose of our conversation is to kind of do that deeper dive. So what does that I have Black friends actually, what does that actually mean? So you know, is that used as a form of defense or what? The why?
Do you want me to take that?
Yeah.
Do you know, I think it's a self-justification. I can't be racist because I know a Black person, right? Or I have a Black best friend, or as opposed to, I mean, it's a little bit like saying I understand women because I know one of them.
Yeah.
It is laughable when you think about it that way, but it becomes the justification. I'm not racist because. So I think that's the bit that isn't said, is they're trying to put a preamble and go, you don't need to look over here. Usually the first person who tells me that they have a Black friend or a gay friend is the one I'm already clued on to from the very beginning. So to me, it's almost an alarm bell that someone feels the need to tell you that justification that I'm not is what they didn't say, but that's what they wanted you to take away from it.
And so when we think about the dynamic between different women and, you know, different women and white women, why are those relationships really important? Yvonne, why bridging those relationships? Why is it really important for us to do that?
I think that in order for Black women to get anywhere in society, we have to acknowledge that we are not in positions of authority and power. We have to own that. It's a fact. You know, sitting at the top of the pile are your middle-class, middle-aged white men, and coming very fast up behind them are middle-class white women. And they are the ones that own and hold the power. So unless we kind of acknowledge that as a group of Black and white women, and therein lies the issue, because when you talk to white women about their power, they go into the, well, we're still discriminated against, and we're still, you know, and it's still difficult for us, and it's still hard, and so on and so forth, all of that. But they actually have quite a lot of power. and they don't readily share that power. They don't readily use their voices to support, enable, encourage, motivate Black women. They're much more comfortable with Indian or Asian women, as Sabina has quite rightly pointed out, because they feel that they're much more like them, you know, more educated and so on and so forth. And of course, being a Black woman, I'm going to be angry and, you know, potentially might have a go at them or be unpleasant to them or unkind or whatever it is that they're fearing. And so they have to understand their power. And I think most of them, I shouldn't say most of them because I don't know most of them, but a lot of the ones that I have come across and met don't understand their power. They believe that, sorry.
So just finish that off, Yvonne, and then I'm going to come
to just that. And also we as Black women have to acknowledge their power as well, and that we need them in order to get to where we need and want to go. I'll stop.
Okay. So Anne-Marie, Yvonne has kind of articulated that white women don't own their power, don't encourage, support or enable different women. What again is behind that? What's your experience? Is it something that you would agree, disagree to?
I'd agree, and I think there's partly an issue, as Yvonne has articulated, that, you know, white women are still sitting here going, well, we haven't made it. I mean, you know, the NHS where I work within 77% female, and we still haven't got 50-50 on boards. But of course, the narrative has been, up until the last couple of years, that's, you know, 50-50 on boards of white women, because we are still, you know, woefully undiverse at our senior levels across the whole of the NHS. So there's been a sort of campaign has been, you know, let's get women on boards, and it hasn't looked at the needs and issues of all women. It's focused on those that are already progressing through the system, that have got advantage, that have got privilege, and therefore can access you know, the people who are making the decisions. So I think there's probably also a bit about you know, white women are have good relationships with white men. They're less threatening to white men. Plays back to the sort of angry Black woman trope, doesn't it? That actually, you know, white women are not seen as quite as competitive in terms of taking jobs away from and seen it being in that space, although there is still an element of that. So I think, you know, there's a number of things playing out, and I don't think white women really have seen it as their job to look after all women.
And that's one of the things that I think really stumped me, and I must say, I'm going to use that word, really infuriates me, because when you think about whether it's the suffragette movement or you know, where women are today and the whole gender equality, you know, white women have really benefited from this, and it seems really shocking that, you know, as you said, Anne-Marie, that, you know, to a great extent, different women, Black women in particular, are the forgotten gender, just don't exist. And so is it okay, Sabina, to almost replicate the same levels of discrimination and exclusion that white women, that we're all fighting against when it comes to, you know, when it comes to patriarchy? Is that acceptable? And why?
No, of course it's not acceptable, but it is something that's so ingrained and it's so systematic in every single organisation. And like everyone said, there's no space to be able to talk about it. We don't move on, and we don't talk about race, and we don't think about how we're going to move the dial. And I think that's the biggest thing. Nobody spoke about this until the Black Lives Matter movement happened within the organisation globally. And I think that was one of the biggest kind of change and being able to talk about it.
Do you think, you kind of stepping into the now and Black Lives Matter, you know, the murder of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and the global response to that, do you think that has made a difference in the relationship between different women and white women in the workplace? I'm going to ask you, Suzy, because, you know, you've been working in the kind of corporate space. What have you noticed has changed? Do we have a more intersectional perspective? Are gender networks becoming more inclusive?
Do you know what? Quite frankly, I think most inclusion and diversity agendas got caught out in being fairly one-sided. No, maybe not one-sided, but not fully dimensional. From my perspective, race was something you were pushing water uphill up until about 2 months ago. It was not on the agenda. In fact, I had a client who a week before George Floyd's murder told me race was not going to be on the strategy when I put it on the strategy document, and 3 days later called me back up and said, could you put race back on the strategy that I asked you to remove, right? Like literally that swiftly. I think in terms of for white women, what I've seen is a massive awakening to the blissfully ignorant position, right? We can call that white privilege or many other names of, I had no idea, I didn't realize, I had maybe not quite an idea that I'm part of the problem. So I've seen a huge journey, depending on how thoughtful people were, how far they took it, from, well, that's interesting that you work in race, to, oh my goodness, I'd like some of your skills, to, it's my job to get skilled up. So I've seen the whole spectrum from different white women, but mostly moving from ignorance to awakening, and then a few people moving to, and I'm going to play a role, action, but not everyone.
So a few people kind of moving on to doing something about the transformation that's required. This notion again, I had no idea. I didn't know. This is a new awakening. Yvonne, has that been your experience? Given your long tenure in the NHS, have your white female colleagues just not known about the impact of race and when it comes to different women in the workplace?
I think, when I describe to people what I think is going on in our world, I know that there's a normal distribution curve for absolutely everything. So you're going to get some people who are, one side of the normal distribution curve, who are like, we really have to do something. It's really important that we do it, and let's make the changes. Yeah. And then you have a whole host of people in the middle who are kind of like, who cares? It doesn't affect me. It doesn't really bother me. But if I have to do something, I'll do it. And you have the other ones at the other end who are absolutely against it, and really are against any kind of racial integration at all. What we don't do is we don't own that continuum, because we imagine that we're all lovely, fabulous, soft and fluffy people, and that we all want the best for everybody, when actually that's not the reality. So to answer your question, in the NHS, we have that normal distribution curve, and you have some people who want to make changes. You have a whole host of people in the middle who actually, we'll do what we have to do. CQC are coming, so we'll tick the box and do what we need to do. And we'll, put on a few training and development programs, and we'll do this and we'll do that. But you also have the group of people at the other end. And actually last night I was party to a letter that a middle manager in the NHS had written to an MP, saying that they really think it's outrageous that we're actually doing these programs called RES, where you're going to actually give these Black and ethnic minority people jobs that are taking them away from white people. So you have the whole spectrum of people in our world. Some who want change, and some like Mr. Trump, who might not want change. And you get.
I would resist the attempt to even think about him for at least for the next 24 hours. Certainly whilst we're on this webinar. But point taken. So when I think about the research, different women, 92% said gender is not a unifying factor. So again, Anne-Marie, what's your lived experience been in building relationships with different women? And then Sabina, I'm going to come to you. Same question.
Yeah, I suppose I had a pretty sort of pivotal moment working with my colleague who was the director of inclusion and a Black woman, and the two of us trying to work together in the space of inclusion. And one of the things that happened during that relationship was recognizing early on that even with the amount of knowledge and experience that I had and the openness that I thought I had, that there were still things and ways that I was behaving that impacted her, that weren't necessarily reinforcing her voice supporting her with my other management colleagues. And, you know, partly because it put me in a difficult position. It made me be the awkward voice rather than her always being the awkward voice. And we worked a lot through that to look at how we could work together and support one another. So I think there's, you know, if I'm experiencing that and I'm, you know, and I was actively trying to do something and trying to be aware, I you know, absolutely see that happens all over the place with other women, you know, potentially wanting to step into that space but feeling uncomfortable and not knowing how to do so, because it puts you right on the edge of your own vulnerability.
What did you discover? What was it that you discovered about yourself on that journey?
I mean, I had to face my own racism within that journey, and I had to recognise that that it's okay to call that out, and that's, you know, I'm not a white supremacist, you know, but actually that understanding that we're all socialized into racism, and I have been brought up with those biases, and I've really got to check myself in those conversations, was probably one of the most important moments that I ever faced. And the fact that I called it out with her to our senior management team and then started calling them out about it was probably the thing that started to make the difference in our relationship.
And that does take, as you said, a real level, that takes courage, you know, that takes, again, a real fearlessness. And so kind of, Sabina, asking you the same question really about what your lived experience is as an Asian Bangladeshi woman. Are they the same? Are they different? And also talk to the relationships maybe with white women that you've had that have worked. What has made those relationships work? And also what's got in the way when they haven't?
Yeah, so I guess I knew that I was a different girl first before I knew I was a different woman. I grew up in the 80s and 90s in South London, so I went to school in Bermondsey. So I experienced overt racism in a girls' school. So I knew right away that I wasn't white and I wasn't going to have the same kind of opportunities. For example, even at lunchtime, you know, white girls could go out, but Black and Asian girls couldn't go out because there was the National Front who would come and throw stuff at us and attack us. And so even then we had different kind of experiences of school. And I kind of recognized that from such an early age that I was different and I wasn't in the majority. So when I went into the workplace, I guess I just thought workplaces might be a little bit different. So again, went in and I didn't have any mentors or any sponsors. I didn't have anybody helping me in my career. There were no role models, and I didn't have a lot of white women around me who were there as women role models to help me through my career or help talk about what the barriers were. So I didn't have a lot of support. But in terms of, you know, later on in life and really kind of understanding how to navigate it and how to ask for help and how to work with other women. And it is just about calling things out and being able to show the kind of experiences that I was having without making somebody feel too guilty about it, because then white fragility comes into it as well. So it is a skill. And I feel like where we are now, where we can discuss race, I wasn't there at the beginning of this year, for example. And so there are some women who've helped me in my career. But in one of my workplaces, for example, I wanted to go for a promotion. The director of the program thought I'd be really great, and lots of other.
Was she a white woman that thought you'd be great, or?
It was a white man. He thought I'd be great. And then there was another woman who was a Jewish woman. She thought I would be amazing as well. And I got lots of great feedback and told to go for the role. But then when we went to a Christmas party, two white women took me to the side who would have been kind of doing the process. They were pretty drunk and they told me not to bother. And I wouldn't get a promotion where I was. And I really knew then that I wouldn't, no matter what I did, I wouldn't be able to win them over. And I didn't want to waste my time trying to win them over. And one of the things is, as I know, this is my brown privilege as I describe it, is no matter how angry I get, nobody describes me as angry. Everybody's like, oh, she's really passionate, isn't she? And so I do get away with kind of being more kind of louder and more open, because people don't expect that of me. And when I do it, I get labeled differently. So I've used that and I've learned that across my life.
I mean, that's an interesting dynamic when it comes to brown privilege. And I think that's something that we will definitely be exploring. But one of the things you also talked about was white fragility. And we talked about white privilege. We talked about white fragility. Yvonne, can you share any examples of where you've experienced that? What do we yeah, what do you mean by that? How do you define white fragility when it comes to working with white women? How does it show up, and what impact has it had on you?
It's a really, really good question, actually, because it sort of ties in with white women's tears quite a lot, and I don't know if people have read about that, but you get these circumstances and these situations where you're having conversations with people, and then they'll cry, you know, they'll just start crying. And the crying kind of like stops you in your tracks, because if somebody starts to cry, what do you automatically do? You empathize, don't you? And really sorry, and shouldn't know. And in my experience, and maybe it's to do with the fact that I am I'm quite focused, and I know exactly what I'm saying, and who I'm saying it to. That I have had quite a few white women cry, and they say they're really sorry. And, you know, that I've been going through that, or, you know, I'm really sorry about this or that or the other. And it's a really effective tool at stopping you from having the conversations that you need to have, because you then focus on that individual and try to, you know, empathize, and it shuts you down and shuts you up. So I think that there's this, I don't know how you can describe it. It's not even white. I don't like the term white fragility, but it's kind of like a behavior that is exhibited in order to stop the conversations. But I suspect it's unconscious. I don't know whether it's conscious or it's unconscious. I suspect it's unconscious, but actually I believe that a sizable let's say a few white women use it quite a lot to get to where they want to go and what they want to do. Because most Black women that I know, and I'm talking Black women, I'm not talking about other groups of people, don't cry like that in situations like that. It's the last thing we would do. We go and scream and cry at home and shut ourselves behind doors, but we tend not to do that, in my experience. People might say that's wrong. So there's this thing that you have to deal with. So you don't only have to deal with your issues and the fact that you're having a really awful, terrible time, but you have to remember that some of the things that you can't say to others, because it will offend them and make them feel very you know, uncomfortable, and you have to make sure that they're feeling okay, and so on and so forth. So you're dealing with your issues, and you're also dealing with their issues as well. So it's double whammy.
And I mean, this is about intersectionality, you know, triple disadvantage. So Suzy, you know, we've heard reference to you know, the Black aggressive woman, and that seems to be, you know, a stereotype that is held and is known. Terms like white privilege and white fragility are just emerging as part of the discourse. Again, same question really. What is your lived experience? Now we're getting lots and lots of comments. So after that, I'm going to kind of read some of them and pull on those too. But what's your lived experience in relationship with women like me?
With women like me? Well, I'm a little bit like Anne-Marie. If I look back 10 or 15 years ago, I'm not sure I would be so proud of all of my reactions to conversations about race. I can honestly say the first time someone brought me what in a 12-page document dictating racism at our organization, and I was the one who should have opened up and welcomed it, I said, oh, that can't be possible. We're not racist, you know, and did that whole, oh, no, what are you saying? Don't use the R word. So I might not have had tears, Yvonne, but I definitely had the, oh, we're not that, right? Please don't say that. And the thing you can grow. I am living proof that you can grow. I think you can't have conversations about race without getting into this stuff that's so uncomfortable. My friend John talks about it, leaning into the wince, you know. I have been as a white woman and a white woman working in diversity and race, I've been course corrected countless times, and you got to be ready for it because you're going to get it wrong. But I think okay, mea culpa, right? And that won't happen again. But I think the only way not to get it wrong, to get it perfectly right, is the way to get it totally wrong, which is to do nothing, right? So I think some of us, going back to white women's tears, we got to steel ourselves to just own up to the fact that we're part of the problem and we're part of the solution, and that on that journey to the solution, there are some things that are going to need to change, and we might wince at our own behavior, like,
Absolutely.
and have robustness in the conversation.
Absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. One of the quotes from Different Women was, there's always that elephant in the room. And I really love what this woman said. My white female colleagues don't often talk about race and culture because it makes them feel uncomfortable. However, those of us from other races and backgrounds generally feel uncomfortable is our default setting in the workplace every day. So I'm hearing this term a lot about, but it's uncomfortable and it's hard. And yes, it has been, certainly for different women, Black, Asian, ethnically diverse women, forever. So agreeing that there's something about, kind of pulling up and strapping ourselves in and doing the stuff that needs to be done. Unless, of course, we are now willfully choosing not to. Because historically, maybe this time last year, I know for me as a practitioner in this space, I was thinking, I don't know, I was naive. I was in some kind of utopia land. It was tough, but I felt that change was happening. Coronavirus hits, right? The disproportionate impact on Black, Asian, ethnic minority people. George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, all of a sudden, no, we didn't know, we never knew. And so there's something quite stark about that. And now we know that you do know. And you know that we, as in terms of, ethnically diverse communities, we know. And so there's a whole different set of expectations here. I also just want to read a couple of things. Sabina, you ready for this? Oh, I'm a white and middle-class woman. This is Emer who's saying that. Have never felt especially powerful, but I'm only just beginning to understand the power of automatically fitting in, right? And so that, she said, I'm also an economic migrant of 30 years, standing. No one has ever accused me of taking their jobs. Someone else says, I used to work for an NHS membership organization and remember how ruffled members' feathers were when Yvonne came and spoke to them about the res. When you really hold the mirror up, it's tough to face. And then someone else saying, how do we help all women unite behind being a woman without losing the unique challenges that different races, sexuality present in terms of equality? So those are just some, that's kind of just a flavor of some of the things that are being, that's kind of being raised. So again, we're hearing that gender is not this unifying factor. What gets in the way? Different women talk about trust, competition, racism, psychological safety. Which of those four do you think is the most significant? Sabina, that's to you. So we got trust, competition, racism, psychological safety. And you're on mute, just to say.
I think it is the kind of the race. I think it is the race issue again. I think it is all the stereotypes, everything that comes with each of those races. I think they're so attached to, myself and Yvonne. And so when we walk into a room, people have made, hundreds of assumptions about us. And then when you have those assumptions made about you, you then can't build that trust and you can't, get people to kind of support you and help you. And I think race is definitely the biggest kind of barrier to creating those relationships. And that's what I feel every day when I'm working, and I feel that's what I need to get over when I'm building those relationships. And then there's the hierarchy of race within the UK, and you have to work harder depending where you are within that as well.
Anne-Marie, so race is the most significant. My question is, why do you think white women, different women, don't trust white women, and vice versa?
Oh, That's a tough one, but I mean, you know, it comes back down to the othering that we grow up with. So you trust people who look like you trust people that you know, and we're taught to trust to not trust those that don't. So I think, you know, it starts from a really, really early age, and you know, the dominant good in this world is seen as white, isn't it? You know, I'm sure most of us have seen that, you know, that classic video with black children being shown black or white dolls and choosing the white doll over the black doll that looks like them, because they're socialized into early age. Yeah, sort of just, you know, just right, okay, what, you know, white is good and kind and beautiful and pretty and all of that sort of stuff. So it starts really, really early on, but you know, we can overcome it, can't we? And I suppose the other thing I wanted to just reflect on out of that list is the psychological safety aspect, because I know, you know, on my own journey, one of the things that I experienced, and we haven't talked about it yet, is white guilt, you know, which is where some of the tears and stuff comes from as well. That, oh God, I just, you know, I feel so bad about this, and actually not feeling that you can hold that, you know, I've been so responsible for this for the, you know, all of my life, and oh, you know, what can I do? And you know, the conversation I had was that you've got to live with that. I will never have black skin and walk in the, you know, go out and be treated as a black woman. I will never have that lived experience, but I can empathize with it and I can do something about it. And, you know, speaking out and acting up and using your power is one way to deal with that white guilt, in my view.
Like, you know, I guess that's what leaders do, right? I mean, you know, it is shifting from that place of discomfort and you know, making a change. That's, in my head, is what leadership is about. Sometimes in organizations you wonder where that, you know, where that lives. Suzy, barriers, what are they? I mean, in your view, why do we not have an intersectional, unified agenda for women, where we respect each other, there's mutual trust, psychological safety, no competition, and no racism?
I love this world.
I love me too.
I was really struck by something Anne-Marie said. The depth and extent to which affinity bias plays a role in relationships and interracial relationships, I think, is quite startling. It's one of the things I've come to understand is, you may have gone to a very diverse school, but by the time you got to university, your friend set maybe shrunk a little bit. And then by the time you got into work, then again, the friend set shrunk. And then by the time I talk to an executive and say, and who's at your dinner table? You know, how many black or brown individuals are at your dinner table? The answer is, I've never had anyone who's black or brown at my dinner table, right? And that minimizing contact because I'm comfortable with people like me. Stereotypes take a stronghold in our heart when we don't have enough diverse viewpoints of the incredible soul, spirit, giftedness of the communities that we're talking about, because you can bat a stereotype away when you've got 10, 20, 1,000 viewpoints, right? But as soon as you only get your information from stuff out there and you don't know the human beings, we're in real trouble. So that lack of affinity, lack of connection, lack of meaningful relationships, and who is at your dinner table is always my first question, because you're never going to really bridge that affinity gap. And therein lies racism. So it's masked under affinity, but all that more systemic racism and then the perpetuating white workplace culture and finding it hard to get on around here if you're a bit different is all embroiled in that high affinity, low affinity model that keeps going.
So thank you for that. I've just been told that we've got 5 minutes left. I can't believe this. This cannot be true. Is this real? So Yvonne, in terms of those barriers, you know, we talked about that a lot. Why are white women more positively perceived in the workplace, and how do white men perpetuate that, or men generally? So what's going on there? Because again, whopping 93% said that white women more positively perceived across, you know, every dimension of leadership. What's going on?
Gosh, I think your panel has answered that question already. But the point is that, you know, white women have access to white men, And, you know, they are able to have the conversations that a lot of Black women can't have with white men. White men feel very comfortable around white women because, you know, they have a lot in common. White men marry white women on the whole, and they understand them, they know them, they feel comfortable with them, and they are able to convince them of, you know, what their needs are and so on. We don't, as Black women, have those opportunities. You know, occasionally they might exist, but not in the way that it happens for white women, and actually, you know, quite a lot of Asian women, because of the things that Sabina has said.
Okay. So how do we change this then, Yvonne? What's your thinking? What needs to be different going forward?
Yeah, I wrote an article in the HSJ yesterday. Somebody had asked me, do I think it's going to change within the next 10 years? And I'd said, nope, categorically not. It'll be different, but it won't change, because this thing that we've developed, the world has developed, has taken 400 years to take hold and to have the roots that it has, and so on and so forth. And I remember a white woman saying this to me once, and I never forget. I've never forgotten it, because I was so cross with her and so angry with her for saying it. And I now looking back, she was probably much more conscious than I was at the time, because she said to me, do you know what, Yvonne? I thank God every day, and I pray to God every day, that I was born white. Now, when she said that, I was like, well, what's she saying about me? But what she was actually saying was, I understand and I get how different it is for you as a Black woman, as opposed to me being born white, and the privileges and the way the world is with me. And I wish I could meet that woman again, so I could actually shake her hand and have a conversation. Actually say to her, you know, I get it now, because at the time I was, you know, I was not impressed with that. I thought, you know, what are you saying? So how are we going to change it? The only way we can change it is to continue to have these kinds of conversations that we're having now, with white women, with brown women, with all women, having the conversations that we need to have, and people understanding, you know, the hierarchy of preference that we have in our world. You know, that if you're Black, you get back; if you're brown, stick around; if you're white, you know, we and owning that, and owning the fact that, you know, Black women have a different experience. You know, our hair is different to Asian hair and white hair. So again, there's that barrier about how we look after our hair and our skin. You know, that white women don't understand. They don't understand. They go swimming, they get out, you know, give it a shake and
I can do that. Well, just say on, I can do that now. This is why I've changed my hair, and I now have a bit of an afro. I'm just going to move on, because Paul says we only have, Paul, you could give us just 4 minutes to wrap up. So continue to have these kinds of conversations. Really important. Sabina, what's going to take us to even 3 steps towards a better working world for different women and white women? Sorry, you're on mute, sorry.
I think it is just to have more of these conversations and being really kind of comfortable with being uncomfortable and recognizing that. And I think it's about different women also to kind of explore what it means to be different women, and that, you know, we're not BAME. We're a huge kind of number of women. And so it's about thinking about our own kind of privilege and where we are, and where we are in that hierarchy of race. And yeah, lots more conversations and organizations to really kind of think about, you know, my experience of networks is that the women's networks were talking about career development and leadership, and ethnic minority networks were doing stuff around artifacts and history months. And so really kind of recognizing that we have to make sure that people have access to all of those kind of learning and development and promotion and accessibility within workplaces, and having more discussions and recognizing that we all have differences, and realizing where we are, I think is only going to change that.
I really like what you said about we all have differences, although race is a social construct, right? You know, Black is not the only race, neither is brown. White is equally a race. And so there's something about acknowledging that even in this conversation. Anne-Marie, are conversations enough? And Suzy, it'll be about what else? Conversations enough? I have a thing about them. Will they create the transformational change we need?
Conversations are a start. You know, you've got to change the world through relationships, and conversations are the way to have relationships. And I think by talking about this, it's a start. But I also think, you know, my personal view is we've got to do more and then commit to action. So you've got to do something, you know, and whether that's sponsoring, you know, as a white woman, actually, you know, not just men, you know, looking at something like reverse mentoring or coaching or whatever, actually sponsor someone in your organization and really give them the support that they need to open the doors to networks to progress. And, you know, moving away from viewing this as a deficit model, that this is something we can develop people out of. That is not true. What we have got to do is open our eyes as white women and say there is more that we can do, because we're missing out the huge talents of different women by ignoring it. And that, you know, and that's got to be better for all of us, hasn't it, to do that. But you've got to own it and do something.
So Suzy, own it, do something.
Do something. I think there are 3 big changes we can make. So we can't do this divided as a start. That's a given, right? But I think we've got to stop trying to fix minority groups like women and ethnic minorities or ethnic minority women, and spend a lot more time fixing the majority of the organization. So if we're talking about ethnicity, we got to fix some of the white people rather than try and run development programs for the Black and Asian individuals. We need those too, but we've got to fix the barriers that white people throw in the way. And Yvonne, your curve, I call that the nice people curve. All those nice passive people sitting in the middle, we need to activate them, get them moving, and show that passivity is being on the side of the racist. Let's be really, really clear. There's no room for passivity in the fight that we're all as a part of. And then we've just got to stop drawing the equation that diversity equals gender equals women equals white women. That's just it's not a real equation. And we got to blow open what women's networks and a focus on women look like, and just do it differently. There's no other.
So the charge is to do it differently. Kind of, I think we've got to agree that what we have had has failed us, you know, has absolutely failed Black, Asian and ethnically diverse women. And that's come at a cost. And that's one of the things we need to recognize. And we also need to acknowledge and value the relentless, exemplary way that different women lead themselves in organizations, because it's been without that help, support, and actually, even worse than that, it's actually not being seen at all, not being recognized at all. And in spite of that, still we rise, says Maya Angelou, in many cases, in every case. So thank you. This has been, but we could have been here for the next kind of couple of, we've had so many comments from loving Suzy, great event, you know, which is good. And I think this is the beginning. So this is kind of part 1, everyone. There will be many different parts to these conversations, because we're clear, you know, our goal is to really radically shift and change the gender agenda as it sits, because it's not fit for purpose. So I think we're going to go to questions now. This time has flown by. And so Bernadette is going to magically appear from somewhere. Bernadette, are you there? There she is, with her Black History Month banner in the background. Thanks, Bernie. Thank you. You've been busy, right?
I have, and thank you everyone for putting your questions in. Thank you, and thank you to the discussion. I was really trying to multitask and look at the questions and listen and, you know, saying, yeah, you're right. But I tried to focus. So let's see what we can do with these questions that I've got, and I'll try and bunch them in 2s if that helps. So the first one, I think, is a comment directly from the clip. And I think someone alluded to it earlier on. Are BAME guilty of the same thing? So what we watched in that video, are BAME women guilty, or BAME people more generally guilty of the same thing? And the second question, what are your reflections on that poem? And I did bring it to your attention earlier on, I Don't See Color. So are BAME guilty of the same thing? And what are your reflections on the poem, I Don't See Color? And I'm going to start with Sabina.
I'm not on mute this time. Yes, I think it is. I think it's to think that all kind of ethnic minority women are on the same, kind of thinking is a wrong one. I think sometimes, the stereotypes, we perpetuate them in our own societies and then you see them. So I think even within the Asian community, the way that we responded to Black Lives Matter movement and some of the conversations that we were having and not having. And so really kind of pushing the community to say, well, if Black people are being killed, it's our problem as well. And I feel like historically we have benefited a lot from the civil rights movements, the race riots in the UK. And I feel like we also have to do a lot more to recognise that within our own communities around that sort of racism. And I'm pretty sure, my mum would say that. So, it's really trying to kind of think about our own societies and how we can educate people within those as well, whilst working, with white women.
Can I just add to that? And it's a very kind of quick quote that a good friend of mine, Audrey Campbell, shared with me. She said, you know what, when it comes to issues of racism, we all drink the same dirty water.
Yeah.
And so internalizing, we have also internalized some of this stuff, this toxic stuff. And that's why racism is so toxic, because it really equally destroys not just the individual who it's meted against, but in turn it almost reverberates, right? It reproduces itself. It really does, and that's what we've seen. So the poem you were referring to, can you read part of it? Because I certainly missed that, Bernadette.
Okay, I'll read part of it for you. So it says, I do not see color, I do not see color. I see different shades of black, brown, gray, yellow, but I focus on the darkest shade. Oh no, that color, it evokes everything bad, lad, rad in the darkest night. I don't care if you're intelligent, I don't care if you're educated, I don't care if you've won awards, I don't care if you've got a PhD. I don't care about your lived experience. And it goes on with some more of that.
Right.
You can go up and down, I don't care. I have already told you, you do not deserve any compensation, I don't care. So it goes on a bit. So it's just a reflection on that phrase, but the content of that poem. And I'll go to Yvonne for that.
I've never heard that poem before, to be honest with you. I'm guessing that I should have heard it before, but I've not heard it before. And I think, all of us have got to see colour, and we all have to see everybody's colour. It doesn't matter where you're from and how much melanin you have in your skin. It's important that we recognise it and own it and celebrate it, and actually, value it, really. I was listening to a podcast. I mean, I'm a real sad act, really, because all I ever do is read and listen to stuff on race. I mean, I don't kind of read or listen to anything else. And I was listening to a TED Talk the other day, and a woman was talking about melanin in the skin and why we have it and all the rest of it. And that's what it is. It's here to protect us. Our skin is very beautiful. It's very, and the fact that we have used it as a tool to denigrate and make other people's lives a misery is absolutely fascinating. It's racism is the most successful experiment, because it was that to begin with, that has ever existed in our world. And it's self-perpetuating.
That's the word.
And it's going to continue for a very, very long time. I don't care what people say. But what we can do is mitigate from some of that, and to try our best through the conversations, through the actions, to try to actually mitigate from some of the worst effects of racism. Because as you say, we soak it up as well. And what we do is that we look at it in terms of a hierarchy, and those at the bottom, Black people, get the worst deal. So, yeah. I'd like to see the poem. I'd like to see it and inwardly digest it, by the way.
Yeah, I think we all would.
And I'm going to move on from that question, but I'm going to come back to you, Yvonne, because it's a specific question for you, and then I will ask the other questions to all of the panel. So it says, Yvonne, thank you for raising the difference in treatment of Black women, in particular, a great discussion. How do we move the dial on this?
Yeah, and it's hard work, isn't it, to move the dial on it. And I think that, you know, the white women that we have on this panel are unusual. I have to tell you that. These two women who are able to articulate about race and to be able to talk about it with, you know, comfortably, and I've been sitting and watching them whilst I've been talking and saying some things that are pretty uncomfortable, then they haven't been flinching or twiddling with their hair or doing any, I mean, they're staying with it and it's really hard. Now, for us, in order for us to get to where we need to go, we have to be able to get many more white women in a space where they actually react and behave like Anne-Marie and Suzy. And that's going to take energy from all of us to be able to get a lot of them in that space, remembering the curve and the sticky middle. I think that's what Suzy called it, the people in the middle, who actually aren't really bothered one way or another. Those are the people that we're actually going to have to try to move into the space that want to do something, so that we tip over, you know, into things becoming better. But I'm looking at years here. I'm looking at lots of years, not 5 or 10. I'm looking at lots of years here. So yeah, it's hard work. It's hard work.
Thank you, Yvonne. So I'm going to move on to you, Suzy, for the next question. And the question is, how would the panel approach a conversation on race with the overwhelming uncomfortableness of what to say and what not to say?
Well, I think you've got to let people who haven't talked about race much in their life, you've got to give them a clumsy card that they get to use once, right? We get to be clumsy the first time we talk about it. And then you're going to get less clumsy, and you're going to work on your, and sometimes being able to say, listen, I'll help nudge you along so that you're not going to say anything in the wrong kind of way, as long as it's not, you know, obviously blatantly racist. Sometimes I find that's helpful. I do think, though, taking large groups of women on the journey, there is a role here for women's networks. Let's be honest, they're powerful, and they're not perfect. They're imperfect in the way they're designed. But I have a couple of clients who have 13, 14, 15,000 members in their just British companies. They're not even multinationals in their women's networks. And turning that power on, it's your turn to kind of open the door. So I think you've got to go in and allow for the clumsy, but then you've got to sit there and make the ask of the action. And this is, I've seen words in the chat like allyship or partnership. I think we got to sit down and do a bit of contracting and say, you know, there's a role for all of us. We got to do this together, and let's be clear on what we want from each other, and let's go away and make it happen. And I don't think we've done enough of that in terms of the ask of white women, quite frankly. Let's get over the uncomfortable and get on to the changing things, please.
Thank you, Suzy. And I'm going to come on to you, Anne, with the next question. So is this issue also an issue of class?
Sorry. Class often comes up when you're having these discussions, and that's been my experience. That I was running a group with some colleagues, and they were all women, and we were all white, and when we started talking about inequality and inequity, the fact that there were no Black women in the room meant it went straight to class. Well, what about me? You know, I come from a working class background. I didn't have those privileges, and I think you've got to hold that space and recognize it and say, yeah, understand that. But also, if you're from a working class background and you're Black, you're going to be, you know, you're going to be in exactly the same place, but still have the disadvantage of your skin color. So that, you know, that it's sort of trying to bring people into that level of understanding. So that's the intersectional aspect, isn't it? That we've got to sort of acknowledge that, you know, we all come at this from different places. We've all got different experiences, but actually, you know, as a white woman, I can escape my class roots to an extent because people will look at me and won't judge me. But if you're a black woman, you're always judged as black, aren't you? So I think that, you know, it's starting to have those conversations, in my view, but it's difficult, and I find it tricky as well, because the class gets played alongside race, and you know, there is no hierarchy of oppression, is there?
I can see so many of the panel members nodding. I wonder whether anyone else wants to comment on this question.
I couldn't agree more, Anne-Marie, in terms of, it's not that it's a red herring, but people go, well, what about, it's a whataboutery, right? What about class? And it is relevant in moments, and it's irrelevant. So I came from no running water, electricity, but I'm very poor, probably poorer than most people on the call. But I have no doubt that my race never played a negative role, right? And my class may have. I do think it is relevant to bring class in later on, because I think we got to be honest about the economic circumstances. Some Black and brown women and white women, but really, let's be clear, Pakistani, Bangladeshi women, African, Caribbean women, not always Black African women. There are real realities around lived experience that have to do with access through money, but it shouldn't all be about class. So I think it's not letting it become the, well, I was a poor white person. We got to get away from that and say, no, race plays a real role. But then at some point, when we get into the nuanced conversation about how we fix things, we've got to be honest about economic inequality and how it got created and how we're going to fix it, because we don't get to fix race without fixing some of the income inequality. Yeah. Unfortunately, they're inextricably linked now.
Can I just add to that? You know, the great Toni Morrison said that racism is a distraction, and they're just, you know, and it really is. There's always going to be another thing, and I love what we said earlier on, someone about really staying with it and not being distracted. So when we're talking about race, we're talking about race. That's what we're talking about. And we are also talking about intersectionality. But, you know, I also recall kind of working in this space, the use of the race card. And I've always said, can somebody show me where that is, where I can buy it so I can play it and win lots of money? I've never seen anyone play the race card and be better off as a result of it. And so is there something in those conversations about race, which is the class card or the gender card? And let's know that that's what we are playing, because that's kind of part of the dynamic. Yvonne, I see your hand.
Yeah, and I think it's a really, and I like what Suzy said about whataboutery, because Victor Abadawali says he can set his watch by the time that people actually bring up something else when you're talking about race. But when we're talking about race and class, it's a really interesting thing, because a lot of work has been done on this. And if you guys recall, the first 10 doctors that died from COVID were all from ethnic backgrounds. Now, within no stretch of the imagination is a doctor, or can a doctor be classed as working class? You know, these are at the top of the hierarchy. And work that's been done in America shows very clearly that regardless of where you are, whether you're a judge, an accountant, whether you're a lawyer, if you are a Black woman, you will still experience a lot of the things physiologically as well as psychologically as the poorer. In fact, you are more likely to have things like diabetes, heart disease, coronary heart issues, if you are a middle-class Black woman. And why is that? Because you are having to assimilate, you are having to behave in a way that is not, usually your norm. You're having to make sure that you dress in a certain way, your hair's a certain way, and that is additional stress and strain on you. So even if you are a middle-class Black person, and there are fewer of those around than ever, the issues for you as a Black person, as colleagues have already said, are worse than your white working class people. And I think that people need to understand that. So it's not just a psychological thing, it's a physiological thing, and how racism impacts on your well-being, on your immune system, on your psyche, the whole thing. So whether you're middle class and have lots of money and sit in your house and can put your feet up and feel bad, or whether you're sitting in a shack somewhere and feeling bad, it's the same 6 and 4. So class is in there, but actually it doesn't protect you at all from racism. Just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Yvonne. I'm being told off with time, so let's see what we can do here. So Sabina, this is a specific question for you. So you encourage this individual to stand for the chair of Aviva's Women's Network. Do you think having a brown woman in that position helps to cultivate an intersectional approach to our women? And the next question is directly to Suzy and Anne-Marie. And it says, what are some of the practical actions you can take as allies that can be shared with other white women so that there is real and sustainable shift in this area? So first to Sabina and then next to Anne-Marie and Suzy.
So the question was, do I think that we should have a brown person on the Women's Network? Is that correct?
No, you actually encourage this individual to stand for the chair of the Aviva's
I know who it is. Yes, I did, because I felt that at the time that we were creating all these employee resource groups and we wanted intersectionality, and I felt that just from the applications that it wasn't going to happen, and that I probably needed to encourage people to apply for different things. So this specific person wanted to apply for the Race Equality Network. And I said, how about standing for the Women's Network and pushing race through there? And yeah, she did a really great job of bringing intersectionality in. So yeah, that's how I kind of dabble and try and orchestrate things. So I would encourage people to do that, and then encourage the person who has the role to recognise their difference as well, and what it means for different women within that.
Absolutely, and I'm an advocate for that, for getting a more inclusive gender equality network. So the next question, over to you, Anne-Marie, and then to Suzy, the practical actions you can take as allies.
I mean, I think the first thing is you've got to stand and say you're going to do something. And one of the small things that anyone can do is call things out. You know, be that awkward voice where you see a microaggression, where you see some inequity or unfairness, where you are where you're the white woman in the room and there's no different women in the room. You know, speak for them. Don't use their voice, but bring them into the conversation and make sure that you're aware of the impact of whatever is being discussed and how it will impact them if they are not there. So it's things like using your power and starting. You know, if you find it difficult to do, own your own experience. So the easiest way to call somebody out is by saying, that made me feel uncomfortable, you saying that. You're then not saying to somebody, directly accusing them, you are racist, you did something wrong. You're owning what you did, and you can open a conversation that way. That would be one of the things that I think is quite powerful. It's a quiet power, but it's owning your own experience and how you feel.
Thank you, Suzy.
Those are great. I like your allies. I think also along the lines of power, being able to offer up your network and the access you have. I'm constantly aware of the rooms I get invited to, the clients I have, the opportunities I have. And actually, and even now in the inclusion and diversity space, I reckon I've introduced 25 new bits of business to different people who are Black, like who should be in the conversation. This is a Black Lives Matter conversation. I'll help you, get far enough along to own your uncomfortableness, but you got to have some Black voices in the room. And it's not just in inclusion and diversity, it's in decision-making forums. I can remember years ago at the Home Office saying, I have yet to meet a person of color who's in the room not taking notes. This is not okay, right? Like, we have got to have decision makers who are Black and brown in the room, and we should not be making decisions in absence of Black and brown voices. This is just not okay, right? And so you're the kind of person who can raise something like that, in the forums that you're in, but you can also create that access. You can say, you need to meet Yvonne, you need to meet Sabina, you need to meet Bernadette and Carol, and open that door, because you pass on that affinity and say, trust me, they're amazing. And you hand them straight through using the power of your network.
Thank you, Suzy. Well, we've got 2 minutes, so let's see whether we can answer 2 more. Apologies to people, but some of the questions are quite similar, so I hope most of the questions in here have been answered. So this question I'm going to put to everyone. So if you can kind of give a 30 seconds, including you, Carol, a response to this question. So how can we bring senior leaders at work into the discussion who may be ignorant of the key issues as they are? And I start with you, Carol.
How can we bring senior leaders into the room? You know, I think it's kind of quite clear that Black lives do matter. You know, so when you think of reputational, you know, huge reputational risk of, you know, of not responding, there is that. And so, you know, are you willing to risk that? I come back to that same thing about, you know, about leadership, and also about everyone has a race and everyone has a responsibility to respond to this issue. So, you know, pull up your stuff and model the way, live the values of your organization. If you can't live them, then I kind of question why you have that kind of role at all. So it is about influencing them, but not kind of shying away from race as an issue anymore, because it's an issue that we need to address.
And over to Sabina.
Yes, I completely agree with everything that Carol said about trying to use, you know, if you use other organizations as well that are leading the way around these discussions, and realizing the economic impact that you can have when you bring people of color into your teams, into your organizations, what kind of innovation and diversity of thought you'll have in terms of the product as well. I try to talk about the ethnic minority population in the UK is going to be nearly 25% or higher in the next census. So what does that mean for customers and clients? So people need to be able to be comfortable with race, to be able to then be able to reflect that in whatever they're producing, to get those customers and be able to serve them the best that they can as well.
Thank you, Sabina. Then Anne-Marie, then I'll be coming to you, Suzy.
I suppose I think it's slightly more than just trying to bring them into the room, because I think we've had lots of people in the NHS in the room for a long time, and I think they've been saying lots of the right things, and I don't think they've necessarily been then doing anything about it, apart from, as Yvonne has alluded to, you know, we've had quite a lot of tick box stuff that has gone on. So it comes back to the conversations. You've got to sort of tackle it, hearts and minds, you know, one conversation at a time with individuals. And I think that, you know, allowing them to understand what they might do and how they could make a difference, and doing it through that conversational approach and opening it up, because I think, you know, the case exists. If we're continuing to make the case, we're going to be here for another 400 years. So we've actually got to take people with us. And say, look, we can have a different future, and we can do that by saying, let's embrace the difference. Let's not look at the inequity that exists on its own, and let's actually make a change. And do you want to be positive and part of that change? So give people a positive way to engage with this would be my view. So I go and try and have conversations one at a time to try and make the difference.
And to you, Suzy.
You know, I would follow on from Anne-Marie. There are a lot of conversations on race, a lot more now than there were months ago. But I'm a deep believer that we've got to have thought through action and followed through action. And I see far too many conversations. So I would emphasize the spending the time figuring out what we're going to do, who's going to do it, when we're going to do it, how we're going to measure it, and how we'll know when we get there. So I would put my focus on the, once we're in the room, how we make sure that we use all the power in that room to drive the outcome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Suzy. And the final word on this question, over to you, Yvonne.
Yeah, and I agree with everything that my fellow panelists have said, but I think I'm probably a little bit more jaded than they are. I think we have to make sure that if we have senior leaders in organizations, they're there to actually make sure that everything works for everybody in their organization. Are they not? So if they know that half of their workforce, or a fifth of their workforce, or a third of their workforce isn't getting the same experiences as the rest, surely to goodness they're not doing their job properly. And that means, particularly in our health service, that means patients as well. So for me, it should be as a serious an offence not to take this seriously, not to learn about it, not to understand it, as it is to you know, do things fraudulently, not have enough money, not hit your targets and all the rest of it. That's how seriously it needs to be taken, because if it's not, if it's like an, you know, well, we can, we should, or maybe we might do it, it's never going to happen. So you need a bit of carrot, all the nice putting their hands around and talking to them and telling them how fabulous they are and all the rest of it. But you also need quite a bit of stick as well to get them to actually shift and to do what they need to do. And ultimately, hopefully we'll get there. I'll stop.
Thank you. So back to you, Carol, to sum all of this up.
I mean, first of all, I thought long and hard about who could share this platform, you know, with us, and I'm absolutely blown away by the authenticity, the honesty, the fearlessness, the courage, you know, the practical, what we can do, the vulnerability in terms of sharing our own lived experiences. So I cannot thank you enough. Sabina, Anne-Marie, Suzy, Yvonne. I feel that there's a place for us globally to, you know, to keep kind of having these conversations that spur, evoke and provoke change. That's why we're, you know, that's why we're doing what we're doing. Just a couple of things by way of rounding up. You know, it's really very clear to me. We talk a lot about allies, and I think we need to talk about partnership. Because there, you know, when I think about different women, there's a huge amount of exceptional leadership characteristics that, you know, Black women, Asian women have had to implement, have had to, you know, really make happen and become because of those barriers. And I think there's a lot that white women can learn from different women. So I think we shift from allies always feels like we need to help, as opposed to a partnership that is also mutual. Let's not. We are obsessed about what happens at the top in organizations, but also really concerned about what happens in the middle, right? So you know, when we're talking about where the change needs to happen, really paying attention to that. And conversations are just the beginning, right? Conversations do not on their own deliver any change. So let's kind of disabuse ourselves, you know, of that particular notion. And we started something. And finally, really, there is no gender equality without Black, Asian, or ethnically diverse women, who make up 70% of the world's women. So that is our reality too. So thank you to the panel once again. Also want to thank Bernadette for always kind of bringing these questions fast and furiously and adding your own passion into the mix in such a brilliant way. To Rose, who was behind the scene, also to Joe, to Barbara, and to Paul, to all the different women ambassadors, to Aviva, thank you so much for sponsoring this. This is, as I said, the first of many different conversations that we're going to have. Maya Angelou said this, and I love all these amazing women. You know, I did what I did then because I didn't know. And now that I know, I must do things differently. And it's about both doing and becoming. It's about behaviors. It's about mindsets, as well as the kind of operational doing things. So I hope I haven't. Give me just 2 minutes to just make sure. And to you, everyone who joined us this evening, thank you very, very much. You know, together we can make this difference. Different women are becoming a movement. Please, what is it? When you Twitter people, what's that Twittering thing, right? What do you do in terms of Twitter? Well, it's at DWDP Global. So kind of join up, sign up, do what you need to do to be part of this movement. It's going to change things for all of us. So thank you so much once again. I really hope I haven't forgotten anyone. Barbara, Paul, Joe, I think I mentioned you all. Do take care. Go away, make a difference, because your leadership personally matters, that one conversation at a time. Thank you very much and good evening.